Hello?
If I could ask everyone to take their seats, and we're about ready to begin. I'd like to remind everyone that we do audio record, and we are streaming our meetings now. So I will ask that the board members kindly remember to hit your button when you have something to say on the record, and push it when you are finished so that we can get everything picked up clearly. And with that, I will turn it over to Director Troiani, who is going to chair the Finance Committee meeting this morning, as Director McGallis is absent, and I believe Director Buchanan is participating via phone.
Thank you, Audrey. I'd like to call to order the RTA Finance Committee meeting, and the first item would be roll call, please.
Director Anderson? Here. Director Buchanan? Nope, guess not. Director Colson?
Here.
Director DeWitt?
Here.
Director Lewis?
Here.
Director Troiani?
Here.
Director McGallis? We have a quorum of 5 present with 2 absent. If the record would also show that Directors Durante, Frega, Fuentes, Hobson, Ross, Totten, and Chairman Dillard are also present.
You have the minutes of the January 22nd, 2015 meeting for approval. Are there any corrections, deletions? If not, is there a motion to approve? So moved by Director Lewis and seconded by Director DeWitt. Roll call, please.
Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director Colson?
Yes.
Director DeWitt?
Yes.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Troiani?
Yes.
5 ayes, 2 absent.
The next item on the agenda is the report of the monthly financial results for 2015. B?
Good morning. Yes, today we will be, due to the cancellation of last month's meeting, today we will review the fourth quarter 2014 financial results, which are subject to board certification, and we will also take a quick look at the January 2015 results on our new dashboard. A comprehensive written report of the fourth quarter results was provided with your board materials, and a one-page summary of January 2015 results was handed out this morning. Regional ridership levels finished 2014 significantly unfavorable to budget, but the service board's unaudited year-end financial results were otherwise satisfactory. At the end of the presentation, we will be recommending that the board certify that the results of operations of each of the service boards and the region taken as a whole are in substantial accordance with the adopted 2014 budget. A little note about the economic picture. It continued to improve as the year ended, with about 54,000 Chicago area jobs added during the fourth quarter. This resulted in a decrease in the regional unemployment rate to 5.9%, lagging the national average by just 0.3 percentage points, so it's a marked improvement. Okay, ridership. While ridership results for the year were generally disappointing, there were definitely some bright spots. At the regional level, ridership finished the year 3.3% unfavorable to budget and down 2.3% from 2013. As we have said in prior meetings, factors such as the historically cold first quarter, the growth of alternative transportation options, and lower gas prices all weighed on regional transit ridership this year. Trends observed in 2013 continue into 2014, with buses seeming to lose favor with transit riders. CTA bus ridership was down another 8% in 2014 after losing 4.5% in 2013. PACE experienced a 3% decrease in bus ridership in 2014 following 3 consecutive years of growth. Rail ridership, on the other hand, was robust. CTA grew by 3.9% to a record rail ridership level of 238 million, as you may have seen reported. And Metro was the only service board to finish with the ridership favorable to budget with 1% growth over 2013. But despite the unfavorable ridership results, operating revenue exceeded budget by 2.3%, bolstered by higher average fares and favorable other revenue, including proceeds from some of the CTA real estate sales. All three service boards reported favorable operating revenue. So Metro had 11.3 million or 3.1% favorable variance, highlighted in blue, due to a strong lease and advertising revenue, as well as capital credits for outside maintenance work. Pace Suburban Bus had a 4.6 favorable variance due to strong fare performance, while Pace 88 Paratransit had a 9.5 favorable operating revenue variance, also highlighted, as Medicaid reimbursements exceeded budgeted levels. So now let's look at public funding. So that continues to exhibit strength. November sales tax, the latest available, was 5.9% higher than prior year. Year-to-date public funding is now about 2% above the 2014 budget, with December sales tax results yet to be received. CTA also benefited from the real estate transfer tax receipts, which finished the year 15.3 million or 32% favorable to budget. Let's look at system-wide expenses. Through the fourth quarter, they were favorable to budget by 3.6 million or 0.1%, so very close to budget. Metro Pace and 88 Paratransit expenses finished favorable, while CTA expenses were 0.4% unfavorable. Please keep in mind that these are unaudited results, as they will still be completing their final audits. In response to a board request, we have built in a fuel hot button, so go ahead, push the fuel hot button, oh there you go, into the dashboard to show actual fuel expense relative to budget for each service board on a quarterly basis. Some of you had asked that we look at how fuel costs were impacting the budget. This view indicates that 3.7 million or 2.3% of favorable variance in fuel expense through the fourth quarter of 2014, a somewhat modest savings since fuel prices began to fall relatively late in the year. So we'll see more of the impact if there is any as we continue to watch this. And we'll continue to report on this category quarterly as we move into 2015. At the regional level, favorable operating revenue and favorable public funding combined with favorable operating expense results to produce a net result which was 57.6 million, favorable to budget through the fourth quarter. So a very good outcome considering the difficult start to the year. Each service board had a favorable to budget net result for the year. Once audited, these positive variances will add to the service board's respective fund balances, with the exception of 88 Paratransit. The positive variance of 3.7 million will be returned to the RTA to be held in reserve for future 88 Paratransit needs. The regional recovery ratios, here they go, of 53.3% was 0.8% favorable to budget, with each service board at or above budget. Without the approved revenue and expense adjustments, the regional system-adjusted revenue recovery ratio would have been 45.5%, and we consider that like the pure without any of the public funding adjustments. Now let's look at the certification. Focusing on the certification of year-to-date financial results through the fourth quarter, this slide displays the variance of each service board's operating deficit from the budget. The operating deficit is calculated by subtracting operating expenses from operating revenue and does not consider public funding results. Each service board's operating deficit variance was favorable to budget through the fourth quarter. The combined regional operating deficit was 28.5 million or 2.1% favorable to budget. So as we just mentioned, each of the service board system-generated revenue recovery ratio was also at or favorable to budget, producing a regional recovery ratio which was 0.8 percentage points favorable to budget. Accordingly, I recommend that the results of the operations of each of the service boards and the region taken as a whole be found in substantial accordance with the adopted budget through fourth quarter 2014. This recommendation is based on unaudited results. We will inform the board if the audited service board results, once received, differ materially from these unaudited results. So that's the end of that, but since this is also a quarterly report, I need to give a brief review of the region's performance measures for 2014 compared to 2013. So the first chart shows year-to-date regional ridership in comparison to peer metropolitan areas that we use in our annual peer review, which will be discussed a little later today. As you can see, RTA system ridership, indicated by the red stripe bar, declined in 2014 along with 4 of our regional peers. In Chicago, we saw ridership losses of 2.3 compared to 2013. While New York saw a 2.3% increase, more of its services came back online following the Hurricane Sandy repairs. Philadelphia has experienced the greatest ridership loss, down 2.7%, probably also due to harsh first quarter winter weather that closed public schools for 8 days, and they also implemented a fare increase. The next chart, here we go, shows year-to-date RTA system ridership changes by mode. It is clear that bus ridership losses at both CTA and PACE are driving the RTA's overall ridership decline for the year. CTA bus ridership declined by 8% compared to 2013, while PACE is down 3.2%. These losses are due to a combination of factors such as the severe cold, lower gas prices, some service reductions implemented in the December 2012 decrowding initiative, and a preference for rails, faster rail times and travel times. The growing popularity of alternative transportation options such as Uber, Lyft, and Divvy bikes. But anyway, CTA is not alone. 4 of its 5 peers that we use in performance measurement reporting have also seen bus ridership loss this year. So the 2013 ridership report was also sent to you as a board briefing item. It provides a lot more detailing by route and by mode. Okay, rail ridership is a better story. With increases both at CTA and Metro. The Red Line is, of course, now fully open after last year's rehabilitation project and is already surpassing its pre-construction ridership levels. PACE van pool ridership is down 3%, and NTD data shows that 3 of PACE's 5 peer agencies have also reported lower van pool ridership this year. ADA paratransit ridership increased about 5% in 2014. Okay, the final performance measure slide shows regional financial performance results. So on this slide, the arrow indicates the trend in the measure compared to last year, with improvement shown by green arrows. Service levels as measured by vehicle revenue, hours, and miles were up about 1% in 2014, driven primarily by service expansion of CTA, as well as the increased demand for ADA paratransit service. Operating costs are shown per vehicle hour and per passenger trip, and were adjusted for annual inflation rate at 1.7%. These cost measures were higher than prior year by 0.4% and 4.5% respectively, as indicated by the red arrows. However, it is again important to stress that cost increases are to be expected and do not necessarily translate into a budget problem. As we saw earlier in the financial results, each of them are operating within their adopted budgets during the same time period. The next 2 measures look at fare revenue. First on a per passenger trip basis and then related to cost by the fare recovery ratio. Fare revenue per passenger trip, or average fare, has improved by 6 cents. Although no fare increases took effect in this year, an observed trend with the venture transition is that the pass popularity has decreased somewhat despite the discount they offer. More customers have been using a pay-as-you-go approach as they adjust to the new system, which has driven the average fare higher. However, for the fare recovery ratio shown here, which reflects only fare revenue and not other system revenues such as advertising and leases, we saw a 0.8% percentage point decrease to 37.5 and a red arrow as cost increases outpaced fare improvement revenues. In summary, we can say that service levels are up, costs have increased but are still within their budgeted levels, and fare revenue performance is good despite the lower ridership. Additional detail, again, in the performance measures can be found in the quarterly financial report that was distributed with your board materials. Okay, now I'll quickly cover the new dashboard and the January results. January results were good, with most metrics at or favorable to the 2015 budget. One area of concern was the suburban service ridership highlighted in red, which was almost 10% lower than budget, but was 1% higher than prior year. Late word from PACE is that this may have been a data problem with their reported January ridership, which could be restated higher. So they're reviewing that to see what it may be causing that. The shortfall did not translate into an operating revenue problem. However, PACE continues to have experienced higher average fares due to the lower pass usage, meaning that more people, again, are doing pay-as-you-go trips. Operating revenue for PACE ADA is also highlighted in red due to an unfavorable variance in Medicaid reimbursements. And we had told you last year that those were coming in higher than expected, and we knew we'd start to see some lag time there. The rest of the dashboard reflects favorable variances. Despite PACE's shortfall, regional ridership was essentially at budget for the month, something we were unable to achieve in any single month in 2014. January 15 ridership was about 4% higher than frigid January 2014 ridership. Operating revenue, public funding, and operating expenses were all favorable to budget for the month at the regional level, producing a net result for the system which was $6.5 million favorable. So the service board operating results are off to a good start in 2015. That concludes my remarks, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments? Director Totten.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. B, on the urban bus peer comparison, the CTA shows down and Philadelphia down, and that it was supposedly attributed to weather. Boston is up. They had record snow, and they are up. Los Angeles is down, and Washington, D.C. is down, neither of which had the same weather problems. So
This data is for 2014, so it wouldn't yet reflect, well, I'd have to look at when all the Boston snow started. Obviously, it started end of last year. So we'd have to see the impact of their results. We don't have those results yet. We were looking at 2014 data, I'm sorry. The peer performances will be 2013 data. So we'd have to see if the snow impact has yet caught up with the comparisons for Boston. It's a good point. I mean, we'd have to look at that.
well, I'm just saying, it appears to me you can't contribute at all to the weather. There's other factors in there, too.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
The second question is, I think you mentioned that part of the CTA's performance was due to real estate sales. Is there an inventory of property that the CTA has that they might sell, or Metra, and is there a value on that?
I don't have that, but we can certainly request that from them. Yes, they would have a full list of their inventory. I'm sure they know exactly what they've got on the market, what's expected to move, and we certainly can request that from both agencies.
It would be interesting to see what the value might be, seeing we're in some budget problems and maybe there's some money floating around out there. Thank you.
Okay.
Other comments? Director Hobson?
Yeah, I have a concern about the ridership levels. Is this being written off as a one-time aberration, or do they see it as an ongoing trend, bus ridership being down for the foreseeable future?
It is difficult to say, but I would say that is the trend at this time. That's what we've been seeing here. January's off. Excuse me. January's off to a more solid start, but bus ridership and everything we've been reading and hearing about, at meetings and so forth, bus ridership is down, nationally. I mean, we compare to our peers, but it's down in a lot of other places as well.
So CTA and PACE making budgetary adjustments to accommodate that trend?
I think they would be best able to respond to that. But certainly, ridership being down in certain areas doesn't mean you can't provide service in those areas. So I think they need to look at things on a route-to-route basis, and I think they're always doing that. But I think it's a difficult call, but that does seem to be the trend.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Director Ross?
It seems kind of ironic that over the last 7 years we've talked periodically about the last mile travel as it relates to bus in particular, but the alternative forms of transportation that you mentioned during your report would seem to compete dramatically in that area, which makes me wonder if the service boards really have many good options for increasing ridership. New routes maybe. Rapid transit, of course, seems to work where that's possible, but short of that, I think they're between a rock and a hard place.
I think some of those alternative transportation modes are filling some of that gap. And I think we're gonna have to just see what the, long-term impact is of that. But Chairman Dillard.
I assume that, and I hope they are, it is much more expensive to operate rail than it is bus. And I would hope that we, when we're working with the CTA especially, we factor in that there's declining bus ridership. The L is really bursting at the seams, but it is more expensive to operate that, and hopefully, they're taking that into account as well. It's a good problem to have that L ridership's up, but rail's expensive. The other thing, fuel. I know we've gone, especially with the polar vortex, to more idling to keep our engines, from stalling and warming up. Can we get some kind of answer from Mr. Orsino and the CTA how much more fuel cost there is because we idle now, just to make sure that we're ready to run when the temperatures and the weather. We learned from the vortex a year ago, but I know we're idling more, and I'd just like to know what that impact is on fuel cost.
We will request that. To your first point, I think CTA is always looking at this very strategically. I'm sure all the service boards are as well. But as you know, most recently they announced their bus rapid transit. This plan to do that through this central loop area. And I mean, those kinds of things will speed up bus travel, and it helps, right? It helps. I mean, if you could get downtown quicker and move through the loop quicker, you'd be willing to get on one of the buses. But I think when, if they're moving at the pace you're walking, in some of the loop areas, I think that's a real problem, and that's certainly going to discourage ridership. But they unveiled that new program, a few weeks ago, and I think that's, a real positive trend. And I think they'll continue to look at it strategically and see, how to improve bus ridership experience.
One of the things along that, especially with the new system downtown on Clinton and Washington, is our system is very different. We're going to look at do our peer comparison, but we have an extraordinary number of people that walk to Union and Ogilvie and our stations, our metro stations. Where in other cities, it's a combination of a bus. We're a little different, and I think the system, that will run to Millennium Park from Union Station and up and down east and west will increase ridership for sure. But we're very different in the number of people that actually walk to the rail stations compared to our peer cities.
Director Lewis?
B, would it be reasonable, and based on past practices, that as demand shifts, some of the capital needs might also, as we go forward, be adjusted to really kind of recalibrate where the focus might be for some of the service agencies? Is that something that's happened in the past as ridership has gone up or down, those capital needs have been reallocated accordingly?
Excuse me. In 2010, or I think the work began in 2008. They began to do their initial inventory, massive inventory assessment of the 3 service boards. And as part of that, of course, it was just initially information gathering and asset evaluation and asset condition assessment and so forth. And then they've done these annual updates, which we've presented recently. The majority of that is in facilities, is in rail. Certainly CTA did a massive bus replacement, and they're in the middle of finishing up a second year of midlife rehabs and so forth. So the majority of the need is in the rail part of it, right? So which is what, is growing. So that part is addressed, but that doesn't mean that, there isn't, great bus needs. Certainly PACE and CTA have very, large bus operations. So it naturally happens because that's just where the need is. And the state of good repair, as you look at the percentages, and that's in that last report, it's heavily in the rail, and it's heavily in the, facilities, the train stations, all of that needs to be done. So there's less of it on the bus operation side. But by agency, it shifts, of course. So PACE would have more of that because they're doing their CNG buses and they're doing their facility, the garage retrofits and so forth.
Okay, anyone else? If not, is there a motion and a second to approve both ordinances together?
I believe there's like several
Several ordinances?
resolutions on the quarterlies.
There are 4 resolutions, CTA, Metro, PACE, and the
Okay.
RTA, the region.
So is there a motion and a second? Moved by Director DeWitt, seconded by Director Lewis. Roll call, Audrey, please.
Director Anderson? Yes. Director Colson? Yes. Director DeWitt?
Yes.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Triani?
Yes,
5 ayes and 2 absent.
thank you. The next item is the 2014 Peer Performance Report, and Bea is going to brief us on that as well.
So joining us will be Karen Allen, and who's right here. Karen Allen is responsible for all of our, and this is a good segue actually, for all the peer performance and, sub peer performance as well as sub-regional. So she'll be taking you through, she'll give you a little more background, but this is all based on NTT data. It is for the year 2013, but we only receive it we received it this year, I think in 2015, but Karen will give you more information on it. Go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is the 7th time we're presenting the regional peer review.
Tilt your microphone up. Tilt it up so. Is it on?
We can hear you fine. But I don't think it's on.
It says on. Slide the little button.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Is that
thank
better?
you.
Okay. This is the 7th time we're presenting the regional peer review, which covers the top 10 largest metropolitan regions in the United States. The report pulls together data from the main transit providers of each region. So for the Chicago region, of course, we're including CTA, Metra, and PACE, but other regions may have more or fewer providers, such as Los Angeles with 12 and New York with 10, down to Houston with 1. Altogether, there are 42 transit properties included within this report. The sub-regional peer review is being presented for the 5th time. This report examines performance for each mode separately: urban and suburban bus, heavy and commuter rail, vanpool, and paratransit. For this report, we have 5 peers selected to compare against Chicago for each mode. Both reports utilize the most recent data published by the National Transit Database for 2013, which was released somewhat later than usual. We got it in January 2015. This database provides us with standardized, consistent data that we can use to look at what our peers are doing. The full reports were mailed to the board with their board briefing packets earlier this month. For the peer reviews, we use 4 categories to evaluate performance measures. The first is service coverage, which describes how much service we provide to our customers and how much is actually used. Service efficiency and effectiveness evaluates the level of resources spent on delivering those services. Maintenance and capital investment refers to the allocation of capital funds to replace and maintain infrastructure components. And finally, solvency refers to financial condition. For the regional report, we look at the top 10 most populous metropolitan regions in the U.S., where Chicago ranks 3rd largest. As you know, as Bea mentioned earlier too, higher unemployment levels correlate to lower transit ridership, which is what we saw in 2013. This chart includes all the regions included in the regional peer review. The blue bar shows unemployment levels in 2012, where we had just come out of the 2nd year of recovery following the big recession. However, in 2013, Chicago was one of only 2 regions, Boston was the other, to see a slight increase in unemployment rates. The rate for Chicago went from 8.9% to 9.1%, which was the highest rate among the peer regions in 2013, and likely a factor in the year's dip in ridership. Also, as Bea mentioned, Chicago's unemployment rate again dropped in 2014, even lower than the 2012 figure, which is a good sign. Now, you might recall the report presented to the board in the fall on performance measures, where we discussed the 5-year trends and what the Chicago agencies have been experiencing that affect their performance. With the peer reports, though, what we're looking at is how Chicago Transit ranks in relation to other regions, and we look only at 1 year of performance data. What we see with the regional review is that the Chicago region had strong performance overall. We ranked in the top half for 13 of 15 measures and in the top 3 for 9 of those measures. Within the report, we ranked the regions for each measure on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the most favorable position and 10 being the least. We saw 3 rank position changes in 2013. We saw improvement for 2 measures, no change for 12 measures, and 1 rank position decline in 2013, which I'll review as we go through the presentation. The next slides are a series of charts for each of the 4 performance categories. These charts provide the rank performance, again from 1 to 10 for each measure, with 1 being the most favorable and located the leftmost of each chart. Chicago's performance is highlighted by an orange box, so you can easily see how Chicago ranks in relation to its peers. So with the first slide, you can see how strong performance for the Chicago region relative to its peers in each service coverage category. Each result lies in the top half of the rank positions. For each measure shown here, the Chicago region ranking has remained unchanged since 2011. As you can see, New York ranks highest for each of the coverage measures. Half of the regions, including Chicago, reported ridership declines in 2013. Despite the ridership decline, the Chicago region's annual passenger miles traveled still exceeded 4 billion miles for the 3rd consecutive year, which has only happened 4 times since 1991. The next category is service efficiency and effectiveness, where again, we see strong performance for the Chicago region. The increase in Chicago's operating costs was held to 2.1%, which was the 2nd lowest increase among the peer regions, and as a result, each of the rankings stayed the same as it was in 2012. Most notably, Chicago retained its 1st place position for operating costs per passenger mile for the 3rd consecutive year. An operating cost of 56 cents per passenger mile is roughly 24% lower than the peer average. The 3rd category is maintenance and capital investment. The first measure is for the percent of vehicles beyond useful life, for which Chicago ranked 8th in 2012 and 9th in 2011. Although a large number of Chicago transit vehicles were replaced in 2013, another bunch of vehicles reached that minimum useful age during the year. So the percentage stayed roughly the same. However, 2 other regions, Boston and Philadelphia, lost some ground for this measure, and that resulted in our improved ranking. We moved up 2 positions for that rank. After ranking first for miles between major mechanical failures for several years in a row, the Chicago region fell 2 positions to 3rd in 2013. This reflects the impact of aging vehicles and the toll that older vehicles take on service reliability. As you know, there are hundreds of vehicle replacements that occurred in 2014 and more on tap for the coming years, as well as midlife rehabilitations for nearly half of the CTA bus fleet. So I expect some improvement in Chicago's performance for both of these measures in the coming year. The final slide for the regional peer review shows service level solvency, the service area in which we saw another rank improvement for 2013. Again, the Chicago region performed quite favorably in comparison to its peers. The CTA fare increase implemented in January 2013, as well as the elimination of the discount on Metro's 10-ride ticket in February, resulted in a 4.3% improvement in fare box revenue and increased the fare revenue per passenger trip by nearly 7%. For the first time since we've been reviewing peers, the Chicago region ranked in the top 3rd for capital program expenditures per resident and moved up 3 spots in 2013. What drove the increase, of course, was reconstruction of the Red Line South, the Englewood Flyover project at Metra, and the purchase of 793 new vehicles, representing about 10% of the region's fleet. To sum up regional performance, Chicago performed quite well in comparison to its peers, with no rankings in the bottom 3rd for any of the measures. Now we'll move on to the second report, the sub-regional peer review. The sub-regional report focuses on each mode by itself. So here we'll look at bus, rail, van pool, and ADA separately. The purpose of the narrowed focus is because there are no industry standards for these measures, so comparisons to a similar set of peers help us to establish benchmarks for performance. The sub-regional report also allows us to see the strengths and weaknesses of each mode and allows us to see the unique characteristics or circumstances that may constrain performance or point to potential areas for improvements. I know I showed this picture last year and probably the year before, but it perfectly illustrates the unique characteristics of Chicago Transit. The very tight curves and the elevated loop tracks. These necessitate the use of much smaller cars than the industry average. The train cars of CTA peers have up to 2.5 times larger capacity, which represents a unique constraint for the CTA. For Metra, operations are uniquely constrained by the fact that it operates in the midst of arguably the most congested freight network in the country. PACE operates within a geographic region that dwarfs its peers. It's actually triple the size of the next largest peer. Van pool performance is significantly impacted by the lack of HOV lanes and the prevalence of reduced fare ADA van pools, which comprise about half of its fleet. However, these van pools help to reduce the reliance on much more cost and labor-intensive demand response service. So these are the kind of things to keep in mind as we do these peer reviews and look at how we relate relative to our peers. We've done our best to find the most comparable peers, but keep in mind there is no perfect comparison that we can make. So some general comments I can make about the sub-regional peer review. We do see very strong performance in efficiency and effectiveness across modes, and we've seen this in prior years as well. CTA Bus continues to be a strong performer relative to its peers, ranking better than or equal to its peers in 10 of 11 measures. Metra continues to outperform its peer average in 6 of 11 measures, including every area of service, all areas of service coverage and efficiency and effectiveness. And the ADA service in the Chicago region continues to rank well among its peers for 8 of 10 measures. So now I'll go through each of the 6 service modes and discuss individual performance. The sub-regional peer group consists of the RTA service and 5 peer agencies. Check marks will indicate if the Chicago operator performed at or above the peer average for each measure. The first sub-regional peer slide compares CTA's urban bus service and its peers at Boston, Los Angeles, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. As I stated before, CTA bus service performs well compared to its peers, ranking at or above the peer average for 10 of 11 measures. CTA performs particularly well in efficiency and effectiveness measures. It achieved the top rank for 2 of those measures, including cost per vehicle revenue hour and cost per passenger trip, and second for the third, operating cost per passenger mile. CTA had the highest fare box recovery ratio of 39% versus a peer average of 28%. The next slide looks at heavy rail. CTA's peers for this mode are in Atlanta, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. For CTA rail, we see fewer check marks. As I explained before, the top 2 measures under service coverage are significantly impacted by the smaller vehicles that CTA must use. It has to run a lot more service to carry the same number of passengers. So we don't see check marks for either of the coverage measures. This is not an area where CTA is likely to see improvement relative to its peers. Conversely, CTA outperforms all of its peers and ranks first for operating costs per vehicle revenue hour and per passenger mile. CTA riders travel 29% farther than the peer average distance, so that helps to drive down the cost on a per passenger mile basis. Now, last year I reported that CTA had the oldest fleet among its peers at 24 years old on average. However, in 2013, CTA introduced 192 new rail vehicles, which reduced its average fleet age by 4 years and caused CTA to move up 4 rank positions for this measure to number 2. CTA maintained its first place ranking for miles between major mechanical failures, indicating that their fleet is kept in good working order. CTA rails ranked either first or second for this measure since peer reporting began in 2009. In the solvency area, there was some improvement resulting from the fare increase, but 4 of the 5 peers also increased their fares during the year. CTA remains below the peer average for each solvency measure, likely related to the amount of free trips it's provided to qualified passengers. Finally, with all the expenditures related to the Red Line reconstruction and new rail cars, CTA Rail ranked first for capital fund expenditures per passenger trip, which was an improvement of 3 rank positions for the year. The next slide shows commuter rail. Metra's peers include Boston, 3 agencies serving the New York City area, and Philadelphia. As it has every year since our peer reporting began in 2009, Metra outperformed the peer average for all coverage and efficiency and effectiveness measures, including a first-place ranking for operating cost per passenger mile. Metra has the oldest fleet among its peers, but still equaled the peer average for miles between major mechanical failures. In 2013, Metra replaced 56 new rail cars and continued to add more cars throughout 2014. With its 2015 budget, it announced the first ever comprehensive fleet modernization program. It's already underway today, so we will see some movement in that area. Metra did see improvements in its fare box revenue in 2013, but dropped 1 rank position for 2 measures, fare revenue per passenger trip, and fare recovery ratio. Metro's average fare paid remained 26% below the peer average. Metro ranked 6th for fare revenue per passenger mile and fare recovery ratio. Although capital fund expenditures per passenger trip did increase by 8.7%, Metro maintained its ranked position and was below the peer average for this measure. This slide shows suburban bus performance. Pace's peers are in Detroit, Los Angeles, New York, and 2 agencies serving the San Francisco area. For the top 2 measures, we can see how service coverage measures are affected by the large geographic region that Pace serves and its low population density. We see performance below the peer average and no check marks. Pace did see its third year of ridership increases and was one of only 2 agencies to see that in 2013. Considering the large geography that Pace serves and the low population density that results, it's unlikely for Pace to meet or beat the peer average for either of the 2 service coverage measures. Pace does perform well in all the efficiency and effectiveness and maintenance and capital investment measures, meeting or beating the peer average, and we see check marks for each of those. Pace ranked first for operating costs per vehicle revenue hour for the 5th consecutive year, and second for operating costs per passenger mile. Pace ranked third for average fleet age, and ranked second for miles between major mechanical failures. We do see below average performance in the solvency area. Pace has not implemented a fare increase since 2009 and falls below the peer average for 3 measures related to fare. However, Pace did maintain its first place ranking for capital fund expenditures per passenger trip for the 2nd consecutive year. Van pool peers are shown on this slide. Pace's peers are in Dallas, Houston, 2 agencies serving the Los Angeles area, and Seattle. We see only a few check marks here, reflecting performance below the peer average. However, Pace Vanpool has considerable constraints that its peers do not. For example, Pace doesn't operate within a state mandate to reduce single-occupant vehicles, as Seattle's King County Metro does. Our region also does not have carpool lanes that each of our peers do. Pace does not have significant subsidies available to its Vanpool riders like the Los Angeles and Houston Vanpool programs do. These are relatively new programs that are using very extensive subsidies to get their programs up and running, and there's really no telling what will happen in those programs when those subsidies end. I imagine they will reduce some of the ridership. Finally, and perhaps most telling, Pace operates roughly half of its Vanpool program to provide ADA service at a heavily reduced rate. While this helps the region to defray the cost of providing very expensive ADA service, it does negatively impact solvency measures for the Vanpool mode. Pace Vanpool program added 23 new Vanpools into service in 2013 and saw its 3rd consecutive year of ridership increases. So it moved up 1 ranked position for passenger trips per vehicle revenue hour. However, Pace remains below the peer average for both of the coverage measures. In the efficiency and effectiveness area, Pace moved up 1 rank to 1st place for operating costs per vehicle revenue hour, but because its Vanpools travel significantly shorter average distances compared to its peers, we see below average ranking for cost per passenger mile. During the year, Pace added 285 new vans into its active fleet. This helps to start the new Vanpools and also helps to replace older vehicles in need of replacement. With that, the average fleet age ranking improved by 2 rank positions. However, Pace dropped to last place for miles between failures, although this measure gets skewed easily because the absolute number of mechanical failures is so low that any amount helps to reduce that rate significantly. As I mentioned earlier, solvency measures are most significantly impacted by the number of reduced fare Vanpools, but these serve an important function to our region to reduce reliance on demand response ADA paratransit service. The final slide focuses on ADA paratransit. Pace's peers are in Baltimore, Boston, New York, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles. For 2013, we see a lot of check marks, which is encouraging because this is an expensive service to provide. As you can see, Pace ADA paratransit performed equal to or better than its peers for 8 of 10 measures. Starting with coverage, Pace ADA moved up 1 ranked position from last year and ranked first for passenger trips per vehicle revenue hour. This points to effectiveness in the scheduling and dispatch of trips. Since this is demand response service, we see costs rising in tandem with ridership, so effective scheduling is really the only area under the service board's control, and Pace has made improvements in this area. The trips per vehicle revenue mile suffer somewhat because of the larger service area PACE has to cover, but PACE still meets the peer average. PACE ADA paratransit performs strongly in efficiency and effectiveness measures, including second-place rankings for operating costs per passenger trip and per passenger mile. As far as maintenance and capital investment, PACE ADA had the second youngest fleet and the second lowest miles between major mechanical failures. In the solvency area, PACE ADA ranks third for each measure, dropping one ranked position for each measure as Boston doubled its ADA fares during the year and thus moved upward one position for each measure. However, Boston eventually had to lower their fares, and we may likely see PACE and Boston switch places again next year. Finally, we wanted to take a moment to present some of the highlights from the 2013-14 Customer Satisfaction Survey. Reporting on levels of customer satisfaction is part of the performance reporting requirement set by the RTA Act. Surveys were conducted at each service board, PACE in the fall-winter of 2013, CTA in spring 2014, and Metro in the spring-summer of 2014. Today we're presenting the consolidated results for the region. Again, we've asked a set of common questions for each service board's customers to gather opinions on a regional basis, as well as questions specific to each service board. The Regional Customer Satisfaction Report was previously sent to you as a board briefing, but I will highlight some of the key areas here. Results to 3 key questions related to customer loyalty, value of service for fare paid, and overall satisfaction. Loyalty is the likelihood that a customer would recommend the transit service to others. Respondents indicated an 87% loyalty rating, meaning they were likely, shown in orange, or very likely, in blue, to recommend our service to others. This was down about 3 percentage points from the 2011 survey. Value of service is the customer's perception of the quality of service in relation to the fare paid. Shown in the middle bar, we see 73% of respondents indicated they were very satisfied, in blue, or satisfied, shown in orange, with the quality of service. This was down about 4 percentage points from the 2011 survey. Finally, 77% of survey respondents rated their overall satisfaction as either satisfied or very satisfied, which was down about 6 percentage points from the 2011 survey. Results are generally quite favorable. The lower scores compared to 2011 have to be considered within the context of a historically bad winter that resulted in many delays and interruptions in service, transitioning riders to a new form of payment with Ventra, and fare increases. The way the satisfaction surveys were structured, we were able to determine what attributes were rated the most important to our riders, as well as how satisfied they were with that attribute. From this, we can focus our attention and scarce resources on things that matter the most to our riders. This slide shows attributes that are rated most important to our riders and where they've reported the highest satisfaction levels. To be brief, I've listed a few of the top attributes for each service board. These attributes should be maintained to ensure continued customer satisfaction. For CTA, riders were most satisfied with the ease of paying for transfers, travel information obtained through the online RTA regional trip planner, and getting to their destination on time. For Metra, riders are the most satisfied with the total travel time for their trip, availability of service information at the Metra website, and rail operator courtesy. The orange shading indicates an attribute shared by another service board. So for PACE, we see riders were most satisfied with the availability of transit throughout the 6-county region, when and where they need it, total travel time for their trip, and the availability of schedule and route information. So again, these are the areas that are important to our riders and where they feel the most satisfied with our performance. The next slide shows the potential areas for improvement for each of the service boards. Among the service boards, there is some overlap on key areas of customer service, and these are highlighted in orange, so we can see that rush hour headways, schedule coordination, and on-time performance are ranked high in importance and low in satisfaction to survey respondents. There isn't one item of primary importance that covers all 3 service boards, but the attributes that were listed are all related to travel time and reliability. For CTA, other important characteristics with lower satisfaction ratings include the availability of transit when and where needed throughout the 6-county region and total trip travel time. Another important area for Metro customers was notification of service changes. And with PACE, the top 3 were also shared by other service boards and mentioned earlier. So each service board has seen the results of their individual survey responses, and has been working with those results. They're incorporating those findings into their operating plans and policy development discussions. That's all I have.
Thank you, Karen. Are there any questions or comments? Director Colson.
This is all useful. None of the fare revenue numbers really give us a comparison of the basic fare. Is there some way to look at maybe you could go online or something and get, what does it cost in New York for a 20-mile commuter run? What does it cost for the basic bus fare? I think, anecdotally, I think Chicago would come out very favorable in terms of the actual fares. Is there some way to do a comparison of the fares?
Yeah, these are all listed within the report itself.
Is it in there? I couldn't
Sure.
find it.
So if we look at urban bus, the operating cost per passenger trip for CTA is $2.55, and for New York, they are at $3.42.
Yeah, I think a list like
it's-
that might be really helpful for
With
the
the
public
slides,
to
I was trying
understand
to
they're
show
getting
the
a bargain.
rankings. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, I think it might be a good thing for the public to know that the fares in Chicago generally are much lower, I think.
They are,
Put
indeed.
together a chart or something, that might be helpful.
So Karen, with the report's online, correct? Or
Yes,
will be?
they will be.
And then that would detail the different rates and fares, correct? Okay.
Yes, all the actual data is shown within the reports.
Anyone else? Chairman Dillard?
One of the conclusions, and I just want to make sure I have this right, is that our free rides, especially on Metro, affect negatively our solvency ratings. Because we're going to talk a little bit about the free ride program in a little bit.
It isn't Metro as much as it is CTA, but
Pace.
yes, a very big impact.
And on Metro, going to Director Colson, since I'm a Metro rider, my ears perked up. I mean, we're 26% below the national average with respect to overall Metro fares in light of their recent increases, which I think people need to keep in perspective. I look at this as just in terms of comments. This is sort of like my children's report card. I get it, I read it. While we're never completely satisfied, I mean, these results are pretty good. And we're always sitting here trying to figure out how we compare to other, it's hard to get our hands around our own performance measures. And looking at Boston and Washington and our peers, Philadelphia, this is a great way to understand, how we in the service boards are doing. And to me, the most important statistic in here is the one we're the best at the nation or in the nation, and that's we are the most efficient transit system in America based upon operating cost per mile. To me, that's the most important statistic that there is. And the Chicago region, the RTA, and our service boards are the lowest cost operating system anywhere in the United States. And to me, that's the bottom line. And then while we dropped a little bit, primarily because we have such an old system, over the last few years, we have the fewest breakdowns per mile, major mechanical breakdowns of any system in the country. And that's a tribute to the mechanics that work for the service board. Our mechanics are the best mechanics in the United States. And as you see what our customers want, and sometimes, I write it, and everybody's exacerbated when things don't go right. We have the best mechanics and the fewest mechanical major breakdowns over a period of time of any system in America. So, while we're never satisfied with where we are compared to the other cities, we're doing well. And our prices are much lower for our passengers than the other cities. And we are delivering the services better, I think, than basically any city in the country. And Chicagoland is the area that works, to coin that phrase. And while our customer ratings, and I was kidding Director Fuentes here, it's sort of like the airline ratings. I mean, our customer ratings, they dropped primarily because of some real major issues related to weather. Last year, 90% of the people that ride our system would recommend to their friends and neighbors that they take our system. And that is, we're going to work on getting that much higher and up, but that is not a bad number when you look at where our customers are. And I just want to thank, as the chairman of the RTA, the loyalty of our passengers. You know, they've endured last year some very difficult weather situations, and their loyalty is pretty remarkable at 90-some%. So while we'll always strive to do better, I think we're the most efficient system in the United States, and our mechanics are clearly the finest mechanics with very old equipment that there is anywhere in America. So, you know, if I'd take my kids out for pizza after this report and drive them to get the A pluses rather than just the B pluses. So, thanks.
Can you turn your microphone on, please?
Sorry about that. Is there a motion and second for adjournment? Moved by Director Lewis, seconded by Director DeWitt. All in favor say aye. Aye. Oppose? Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Okay, I believe we're ready to begin with our planning committee.